Hello there, I'm Funky Monkey. Welcome to History of Turrican. It is a sad day, my friends. Today marks the last new development in the long and varied history of our silver-suited hero. Yes, today we'll be discussing the Turrican Soundtrack Anthology. I'll be going through the anthology disc by disc, seeing as how each disc represents a different era of Turrican. But before we get to the anthology itself, let's begin with the composer, Chris Huelsbeck. I can't overemphasize the contribution that Chris Huelsbeck has made to this franchise. He was the composer for the entire franchise over multiple systems, with the exception of NES Super Turrican, which was a single-handed effort by Manfred Trenz, and the C64 official Turricans, where Turrican 1 featured original music by Stefan Hartwig and Ramiro Vaca. Having said this, Vaca's C64 title track and ending track did heavily borrow from Transformers the movie, but more on that later. Marcus Zebold provided an entirely original soundtrack on the C64 version of Turrican 2, though Hartwig once again provided the loading track. Also, the game Universal Soldier featured some original pieces of music in some of its stages, but it's very generous to call those pieces music. But I digress. Chris Huelsbeck has created a soundscape that burned into our brains. Across the 4-channel stereo of the Commodore Amiga and the 8-channel surround sound of the SNES, Huelsbeck's incredible soundtrack has in no small part helped to contribute to the legend, which is why, in 1993, an official soundtrack was released. However, this was only a flavour of the original musics, chopped, mixed, and repackaged to fit into a 70-minute CD. Huelsbeck wanted more, and so did we, the public. Which brings us to the summer of 2012. Chris Huelsbeck used the then-fledgling website Kickstarter to pitch the idea of a Turrican Soundtrack Anthology, featuring all of the musics that he created across the entire series, including Super Turrican 2, which was released in 1995, 2 years after the original video game soundtrack CD. The project was launched in April, and within 2 weeks, the funding goal of $75,000 had already been met. By the end of the funding window, the idea had been funded more than twice over. In June of 2012, Huelsbeck set to work. As time went on, small snippets and single tracks were previewed and hinted, all the while feeding the desire for the full collection. Sadly, delays and complications beset the project, and the release date seemed to forever hover in the distance. Until late November of 2013, that is, when the finished 4-volume anthology, complete with inlay booklet and bonus tracks, was delivered. Which brings us, at long last, to the anthology itself. The intervening years have not been kind to our memories. The sound of the SID chip in the later part of the 1980s, as it was beginning to come into its own, would dazzle the average listener, while the same listener today would barely elicit a reaction at all. And yet, with modern production technologies and VST presets, these songs somehow sound exactly as I remember them, even though I can replicate them on emulators or the original hardware. But let's begin at the beginning with Volume 1. Volume 1 covers Turrican 1, which you might think would be the most primitive of the scores. This is a common mistake, because this volume features the driving urgency of Thunder Plains, the haunting loneliness of Enemy Mine, the two songs Jetpack Attack and Flightmare that even made it to the C64 version. In fact, the only thing it really lacks is the windy ambiences of the alien-esque World 4, though that's only because they couldn't really be counted as music. And let's not forget the oft-overlooked opening theme Shoot or Die, and the triumphant victory, which plays, as one would expect, over your victory. This soundtrack has aged well, not sounding overly 80s, nor entirely modernised, but bringing a touch of 21st century cool that the first Turrican always promised. Also, as a cheeky aside, Vince DiCola has supplied a medley of his Transformers the Movie score from 1986 to honour the C64 version, which borrowed the songs Escape and Death of Optimus Prime. Volume 2 covers the legendary soundtrack of Turrican 2, the jaunty upbeat tune The Desert Rocks, the smooth jazzy Metal Stars, the aforementioned classic that is the Concerto for Lasers and Enemies, not to mention the industrial hip-hop of Mr. Walker and His Factory, and The Wall. Combined with The Final Fight, the justly famous 7-minute rock opera that accompanied the title screen, and the heartbreaking freedom that played over the ending credits, I think it's abundantly clear that this is my favourite of all the 4 volumes. This one volume is my misspent youth returned to me. And as if that wasn't enough, the magnificent men of Machine Supremacy even make an appearance, performing their own cover of The Final Fight. Volume 3 covers Turrican 3, but also Mega Turrican, and some of the tracks which were reused in Super Turrican, the upbeat opener Factory Action, which is reminiscent of 2's The Desert Rocks, sets us off nicely on a journey that includes the suitably drippy Wet Dungeon, Do the Bathman, and Swim or Die, which leads into the rock and roll feel-good hit Air Combat. Once again, the alien-esque world is mostly glossed over, receiving a medley of its tunes in the form of Alien Disaster, coupled with the triumphant title track Payment Day, and the ending credits tune that any 80s movie would have been proud to play out to, named only Credits. I've made no secret of not liking the game as much as 1 and 2, but the soundtrack to Turrican 3 is easily the equal of its forebears. Also, Alistair Brimble, who was working on his own Amiga remix album, The Amiga Works, at the same time, provides a cover of Payment Day. Volume 4 covers Super Turrican 1 and 2, though Super Turrican contained portions of the Turrican 3 and Mega Turrican score. By 1995, Huelsbeck's scoring had become much more ambitious, with the orchestral leanings of Super Turrican 2, some of which could be glimpsed in the OVGS. This then, in the form of the introduction from Super Turrican 1 and the world medleys Steam and Pressure and Xenomorph, take up entirely 1/6 of the 18 tracks in this volume. The most part is dedicated to Super Turrican 2, the mostly orchestral soundtrack. From the sublime Desert Storm to the Turrican-esque stylings of Wormland and Submerged, a gloriously laid-back underwater melody, easily the equal of The Great Bath, coupled with the cinematic opening Final Frontier and the melancholy ending Farewell, there is much to savour in this 4th volume. And while this volume holds less nostalgic appeal, being as I never had a SNES back in the day, the updated and remastered tracks stand out more on their own as music. Also included in this volume is an 11-minute full orchestral medley of tunes from Turrican 2, as Huelsbeck himself had arranged for the Symphonic Shades concert of August 2008. One of the extras offered in the Kickstarter campaign was a specialised USB flash drive containing fully remastered versions of all the original tunes captured from the original sound hardware. In January of 2014, Chris Huelsbeck released this 2-volume original sound version anthology to his Bandcamp, alongside the 4-volume modern anthology. Briefly, it is all the original tunes, but as clean and bright as I've ever heard them, and they just go to show what composers at the time had to work with. A good composer can create so much with so little. All of which is why the music of the Turrican series has transcended platforms and been lauded to this day. And so, I would very much recommend for you to take yourself down to the Chris Huelsbeck Productions Bandcamp website and investigate for yourself. And that's it. Until such time as there's a new release or new product in the Turrican line, this video concludes the History of Turrican. Thanks very much for watching, and may your god or your iPod go with you. Bye now!